In modern languages, it all begins really with the notion of the class. And really, the class is the smallest unit of programming, similar how to the term in biology, molecule is the smallest fundamental unit of a chemical compound. So a class can be divided into two parts. The first part is things you are, meaning attributes that distinguishes how you are different from other things, height, weight, and whatever have you, or whether if you're building a house, it's a colonial or ranch or whatever. The second thing is what you can do with those attributes. So think of the term taking action. So first attributes is, to review, things you are. And we call those attributes or instance variables. I'm sorry, I just literally thought of it right now. Secondly, methods. The taking action is usually defined by methods or things that you can do. And I know I said all of this is kind of like constructing a house, but let's pretend in the following example, we're creating a post on eBay to sell your car or buy your car. It all depends on the action you want to take. So let's take a look. All right, as I said, a class is really the smallest unit of programming. So I created a class here, and as I said, a class is divided up into two parts. First of all, the attribute part, and it comprises of things you are, things that make you distinct from other things that might be similar. So in the case of a car ad, and what I'm going to do here is just to make it even more readable or legible, I'm going to put an underscore between car and ad so you can more plainly see it. And just so you know, this doesn't affect the variable. You just can't have a space. Anyways, what do we know about car ads? What do you want to know? You want to know make, model, mileage, and what condition is it in. So part one is attributes. Part two is methods, meaning things that we can do, actions we can do with the attribute or with the car ad. So in this case, we can buy the car, we can sell a car, and we can test drive the car. Just so you know, in the case of classes, methods, better known as functions, must have one parameter always, and Python uses it almost as a placeholder to distinguish a method inside of a class from a standalone function. So for those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, we will be discussing methods, functions, and even classes in more detail as the weeks progress, specifically next week. But just so you know, all you have to know for the time being is that a class is the smallest unit of programming, and this is how you define a class. You start with the keyword class, as I say right here, and then you state what the name of the class is. And this, of course, is car ad. You then list your attributes. Just so you know, this pound sign is a comment. You have to remember, first rule of thumb with programming, you have to comment your code so others know why you did what you did. So we have attributes here, things you are, and then you list your attributes. Make, model, mileage, condition are the attributes of this car ad. I made this out of thin air so you can make any class that you want. Programming is almost like a blank canvas for painters. You can paint any picture that you want. You can create anything that you want. So we have make, and none is an actual keyword. It just, the way Python is, you actually have to put something that represents the placeholder of make. I'm using that word placeholder again. You just have to put something there. And of course, we just use the word none because we're not defining anything. And so we have our attributes here and our methods here. So now we can actually instantiate this class, thus making an object. So here are our objects. here. So let's create our first object. What type of car are we going to have? Let's say let's say Ford Model T. And so here's the key thing. Here we actually create our object. How do we create our object? We instantiate the class. How do we instantiate the class? We say Ford Model T is going to be equivalent to car add. And this is how we instantiate the car add class. We create the Ford Model T object. So we just created our first object right here, and I will note it here in a comment. Create object here. So we create our first object. So in other words, what you can think of this is we created almost like an alias or a substitute for this class. It's almost like if you create a C corporation in business, you created a kind of like you created almost like a separate self. Kind of like, there's a word I'm trying to think of. Kind of like an image of yourself that's somehow separate from your identity. So in other words, when you create a corporation and you get sued because of a product you put out or something like that, you don't get sued, your corporation gets sued, so you're protecting your finances. Same thing with a class right here. You instantiate the class and you create an object from the class. So because you created an object, you now have access to the attributes and the methods of this class. So let's do Ford Model, and of course, here we go, Model T. And how do we get access? Now that we created the access, how do we syntactically gain access to all these attributes and methods? We use the dot character. The dot character is kind of like your remote control, and the keypad represents all of the assets that you have control over. So for example, you have control over buy, B-U-Y, and then all you have to do is open and close the parentheses. Now, the reason why there's parentheses that exist here is because Python has to specify and make unique the difference between by as in a variable name and by as in a function or method name. So even though there's no parameters in here, because remember, this parameter is nothing more than a placeholder, because Python makes you differentiate between a method inside this class and, let's say, a standalone function, so it has this placeholder. You'll notice, if you've ever seen a Python YouTube video, of which there's plenty of them, they'll always use the word self. And that's fine as long as you keep using it. But because I just like to use any old thing. You can even use the word foo. It doesn't matter as long as you put something there that specifies it as a placeholder. Anything. You can fabricate it out of thin air, but most Python books will actually utilize the word self, but it's simply nothing more than a placeholder. So because this is being used here outside of the class, you no longer have to use this placeholder, so it's an empty parameter. Again, so what else? You can say Ford Model T, and then we can say test drive. The only thing we have to be careful of is we just have to be careful of making sure that we spell the test drive the same way, and we even include, if it's a capital, we actually have to utilize the capital. Now, I capitalize D in test drive just to help the user differentiate the variable, so it's more obvious that it is indeed test drive. Now let's go ahead and get access to one of these attributes. Let's say Ford Model dot, and then let's say condition. Now you notice that this is a mere variable, so we don't have to specify the opening and closing parentheses. And we can say it is refurbished. Now, because it is a variable, I hope I'm not even spelling that correctly. Now, because it is a string, it has to be in quotes. It could be single quote or double quote. It doesn't matter. Now, I'm going to go ahead and explicitly print this Ford Model T dot condition, just to have something to show. So hopefully I have spelled everything correctly, and let me write it and quit it. And oh, wouldn't you know, let's see, is not defined. Oh, you know what? Oh, I just made my first little mistake right here. Car add. See, what had happened was I added a D right there. So it should be car add, not card add. My mistake. So let me delete that D, and we should be ready to go. And you bought it, take it for a spin, and refurbish. So that is a class, your very first class used. In a nutshell, you just have to remember to spell things correctly when you're programming. Now, to reiterate, I didn't ask you, as I said, to type as I typed, and I didn't go into detail at all about those classes. Or about Python classes. That will be in further videos, and we'll delve further into classes, and we will talk more about those methods and about strings and about variable types, everything you need to become an effective Python programmer.